Hello, this is Devlog 1 of my thus far unnamed game, which is currently living under the working project title CardCrawler. CardCrawler is a top-down, roguelike, deck-building, twin-stick shooter. In other words, it's a twin-stick shooter where all your attacks, abilities, weapons, and spells are dictated by cards that you play, and you must collect cards to build up and improve your deck as you go. Imagine if Slay the Spire and Enter the Gungeon had a baby. Beat enemies to earn more cards, play those cards to defeat enemies, try to find cool synergies, and build a deck that will carry you as far as you can. So, you're seeing the game's current state in the background, and I feel like right away I need to issue a disclaimer about the art. I'm not an artist. Initially, this game was constructed entirely out of polygons, but that got old fast, and I decided that I needed at least some art. More than one project in the past has withered and died because I just wasn't happy with my ability to draw what I wanted, and I got so hung up on that I stopped making progress and eventually couldn't stand to look at the game and stopped working on it altogether. To prevent this happening to this project, I have allowed myself only about 10 to 20 minutes for each sprite, icon, tile set, or whatever, at which point it just goes into the game and I just have to move on. So if you're unimpressed with the visuals here, just know I feel the same. I do think I can do better given enough time, so at some point either I'll make a few more passes over it and see what I can do, or I'll find an artist with whom I feel comfortable working and I'll just let them make it look good. In the meantime, this is what we've got. So I want to talk a little bit about some of the game design choices that I've made and thoughts that I've worked through up to this point. Initially, my plan was to have a card draw automatically every 20 to 30 seconds, and then you play them as you are ready to. So I implemented 3 or 4 different cards, the systems to draw and play cards, a card shop, and some really basic enemies to spawn in increasingly numerous waves, and did some playtesting. Really quickly, I came across a problem that I think will be, going forward, the single biggest challenge in balancing and making this game interesting to play. Namely, running in circles waiting for cards to draw is not fun. With cards drawing every 20 seconds, gameplay consisted almost entirely of running backwards around the map, waiting for cards to draw so that you can play them and defeat the enemies. I tried briefly to fix the problem by tweaking a few values. Draw cards faster, spawn enemies slower, player moves slower, enemies move faster, enemies have shorter vision or attention spans, but none of it really removed the feeling that I was sort of just capped in how well I could do by how fast that timer goes. Eventually, I realized that to have any chance at really fixing this, I needed drawing cards to be a bit more deliberate of an action, rather than a passive event as it had been to that point. To that end, I implemented the reload system. Cards no longer draw passively. Instead, the player holds down a key for several seconds, after which the hand reloads. Or, in other words, you draw until you have 3 cards in your hand. Holding the button incurs a movement penalty. Letting go early makes you start over. On the whole, this does several things for me. It allows players to draw and play cards more or less as fast as they want, meaning there's lots of room for skilled players to play at a high level without spending years and years waiting for cards to draw, but also attaches a cost to drawing cards that must be considered. In a high action situation, slowing down to reload is something that you might need to do strategically. Think about drinking from an Estus flask in Dark Souls. It is healing, but doing it at the wrong moment is a quick way to get returned to the last checkpoint. You can play as quick or as slow as you like, just make sure you don't get caught in a bad spot with no cards in your hand. This also opens up the future possibility of cards that grant reload-related buffs, shorter reload time, larger hand size, etc., as well as passively adding interest to cards that increase movement speed, since a higher base movement speed will lessen the cost of reloading to begin with, which is pretty neat. With that in place, and pretty pleased with the change, I started to implement a few more cards, including several more powerful ones, and what I realized quickly was that as soon as you have more powerful cards in your deck, the weaker or more basic cards just get in the way. This is to be expected, and it's a pretty normal part of a deck building game, but I needed some way to both allow players to use, remove, or otherwise handle the outdated cards in their deck, and also to balance the higher powered cards. So I implemented an energy system. Each card now has 2 values, energy cost and burn yield. Energy cost is how much energy it costs to play a card. Basic starter cards have little or no energy cost and can be played pretty freely. More advanced cards require some energy. To gain energy, you must either play a card that gives you some, or burn cards. Burning a card gives you energy equal to the burn yield of that card, but removes that card from play until the next round. Now, basic cards are still interesting into the later game since you can play them for free while you save up energy to play a big card, or burn them for a one-time boost to play the big cards faster, or even forego the big cards entirely and just spam low-cost cards. That sounds an awful lot like choices for the player to weigh, which in turn sounds like engaging gameplay. So that's the current state of the game. I think the next big challenge for me, besides continuing to add more cards and generally balance things, is to figure out what the overarching gameplay loop looks like. Currently, you stay in one room and fight off escalating waves of enemies. It's not bad, but it could be more interesting. I've thought about building a procedurally generated dungeon, but I think instead what I'll do is to give the player a map showing a series of different rooms, and in some places they'll even have the ability to choose between multiple rooms or multiple options. Maybe you're given a choice between a normal room or a room with some extra enemies but a higher chance to get rare cards. Maybe one room has a discounted card shop, or a mini-boss, or some kind of helpful NPC. Again, think about Slay the Spire's map and progression. I will also be implementing a status effect system, with support for both passive and negative effects on both players and enemies. This not only opens up some room for more interesting cards, like speed buffs for players, or the ability to poison or ignite enemies, or more interesting enemies who can slow the player or buff each other, but it also opens the door to card synergies. Maybe an attack that does more damage to an already poisoned enemy, or decreases reload time for a period of time, or an attack with a chance to stun an enemy, all in the name of additional strategy and gameplay depth. As for the long term, I've wondered about implementing unique sets of cards that you can choose from at the start of each run, catering to different playstyles, or even the possibility of multiplayer, which would be really cool. Team up, take on different roles like healer, DPS, tank, etc. But I can't let myself think too hard about that yet. There's a lot of cool possibilities for sure, but the biggest struggle of all will be to fight off the multi-headed monster that is scope creep. And maybe for once, I can actually finish a game. Thanks for watching.